Okay, welcome friends. This is Lindsay Law with Youth Rising, a gathering place for families to talk about mental health. And we are super lucky today to have a sleep coach with us. Her name is Janice McCullough, and she's got lots of incredible experience, and she's just going to tell us a little bit about that right now.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. So I'm an occupational therapist by trade. I've been practicing for over 15 years now. And I worked primarily, since my graduation, I worked primarily in mental health, working with adults, teens, children that wanted to work on some emotional wellness, that were maybe in mental health crises. And oftentimes what came up was sleep was a factor. It wasn't the only difficulty they were having, but it was obvious, like it was often contributing to it, or a factor or a result of their mental health concerns. And then when I became a mom and my kids didn't sleep, I decided to take some certifications in sleep and really delve a little bit deeper so that I could understand. And I'm passionate about it because I feel like it's often missed. I feel like we often forget about dealing with that as we're dealing with all the other complexities of what's going on in our daily lives. So then I decided to work primarily in sleep and specialize in that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think that's so true that sometimes we don't realize the impact that our sleep has on the other parts of our life. And so I think this is probably going to be a really eye-opening conversation for all of us, and I'm super excited about it. And so today we're really going to focus on sleep and how it affects teens and the teenage brain, which I'm excited about. And so let's just get started. And the one thing we love here at Youth Rising is the science behind things. So Janice, can you kind of just give us a little bit of what is the science around sleep? What does the sleep cycles look like? And then eventually, how does that connect with the teenage brain?
Okay. So the science is what I love. So I'll try to make it as brief as possible.
Yeah.
So typically we have two main types of sleep, right? So we have REM and non-REM, and we break them into four types. So you have stage one, which is it's just when you're falling asleep, your body starts to relax, your breathing slows, your heart rate slows. It's about that first 5 minutes of sleep. It's when you're the easiest to wake. And so it's important to think of sleep as a cycle.
Yeah.
And so we'll go back into phase one, and then we'll return to phase one. So it's a complete cycle. And every time you go through a cycle, you might wake up a little bit. And so the concept of sleeping through the night is a concept that I really I really do a lot of education on, because people get anxious when they're, I woke up 3 times. Well,
Right.
It's normal to wake up. It's normal to wake up, roll over, get more comfortable, maybe go to the bathroom, or that's normal, and that happens to everybody. And so sometimes it's a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's such good information, because I think sometimes, we start to think, oh, I'm not a good sleeper, or I'm not good at sleeping, but really it's just like that natural cycle going through the different stages and waking up a little bit. That's really important to recognize.
Yeah. And it's also that stage where if you are going to take a nap, it's important to keep it under that 20 minutes, because you are in that lighter stage of sleep that lets you get some restoration, but doesn't make it difficult for you to wake up later. And then you have kind of that foggy, I can't really place myself, I'm not in the greatest mood. If you're going to take a longer than 20-minute nap, you want to make sure you have about 90 minutes to complete a full cycle. So you kind of 20 minutes or 90 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know too, because somewhere in the middle, I've had that experience where I wake up and I'm totally out of it and super grumpy.
Exactly. So we want to avoid that. And then we go to stage two, and stage two is similar to stage one, and the fact that our body still relaxes. We do have some spikes in brainwave activity, and that helps us avoid being woken up by environmental noises or different things. And generally speaking, we spend more time in phase two the longer we're asleep.
Okay.
And then we go to stage three, and stage three is really important for our restoration. And so if you have poor stage 3 sleep, what we find is that your body, this is when your body is producing those hormones and those, it starts to repair tissue. It helps you do all that sort of important functions. And so if you're lacking in stage 3 sleep, then you don't feel rested in the morning.
Right.
And then finally what we have is REM sleep. And this is, everybody's heard of REM sleep.
Yeah.
And REM sleep is when most of our dreams happen, although we can dream at any stage.
Okay.
And that's when we see a lot of spiking in the amygdala. And I don't know if you've spoken about the amygdala before.
I haven't actually. So yeah, jump in there.
Okay, so the amygdala is the part of our brain that processes a lot of our emotions. And so in REM sleep, that's when we see the most firing of the amygdala. And so it's thought, there's a lot about sleep that we don't know. And I think the more we learn, the more we know that we don't know. But right now it's thought that REM sleep helps us process our emotions from the day, help us kind of deal with that piece, whereas that stage 3 helps us with the memory consolidation, the tissue repair, and that sort of thing.
Oh, that is so interesting. I didn't really realize that.
Yeah, it's kind of, and so the repairing, the stage 2 and 3 happen more at the beginning part of the night, which is maybe why you hear getting that earlier sleep is best. But REM sleep happens more at the end.
Oh, okay.
So you have this kind of tug, like this push and pull of which one is more helpful and which one is more important. I would say the whole gamut is important, right? And so you really want that consolidated chunk of sleep so that you can get into those longer pieces of REM.
Okay, so then what does that look like for, like, you know, helping our teens get a good solid sleep so that they're getting those earlier stages for repair and then also that REM sleep at the end?
So often I would recommend just making sure that you're getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep.
Okay.
And so this range is it's a wide range. Some people do well on 8 hours and some people do well on 10. And it's completely individual. There's some genes behind it. So you can look at, you know, how your parents function on little sleep. And but definitely we want to get that total sleep. The difficulty with teenagers is that sometimes what happens in teenage as we become teens is that our sleep cycles begin to push back. So we have a later onset of sleep.
Okay.
For various reasons. There's a lot going on in the brain, myelination, like all of this stuff where your brain is making huge changes. But one of them being that you won't feel tired until later on at night.
Oh,
right?
okay.
The trick is then, how do you get 8 to 10 hours if you're not feeling tired until later at night, and then you have to wake up at 6 or 7 or whatever time to go to school or work or whatnot. So that kind of, so that definitely impacts it. I just want to go back.
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Oh, no. There's one piece that I really want to talk about because there's some really interesting research that's coming out on the impact of sleep and as kind of the garbage man, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
So our bodies have lymph nodes, and the lymph nodes are used to carry out toxins from our bodies, right? So we have a system in our body that carries toxins from the muscles and et cetera, et cetera. The funny thing is that our brain, which has a huge muscle mass, doesn't have the same process. So the question would be, what happens? And how does the brain, that also creates these toxins and these waste products of its normal functioning, how does the brain do that? Well, the research, there's some very beginning stage research that says that it actually, during sleep, your brain floods the system with a fluid and washes the toxins away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know.
That is so interesting. It's like bathing your brain and getting rid of all the toxins. Yeah. That would make sleep pretty important.
Exactly. And so then that's why we see things like memory issues if you're not getting enough sleep, because you're not getting rid of all that stuff that kind of clogs it up and makes it not work as great. The other thing that happens is that sleep pressure, which is essentially, so our sleep is built on circadian rhythm and sleep pressure.
Okay.
So up until 6 months of age, it's all sleep pressure. And then after that, our circadian rhythm begins to develop. Circadian rhythm is based on light and dark cycles. Now, when we become teenagers, our length of the sleep pressure, essentially meaning how long you're awake, is how tired you are. The longer you awake, the more tired.
Okay, I get it. So sleep pressure is like how long, so the longer you're awake, the more, or the less sleep, the more sleep pressure you have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So as a teenager, that they build sleep pressure more slowly.
Okay.
Right? So that's going to increase their the time that they need to be awake before they get tired.
Okay.
And so when that happens, there's some thought that says that there's actually a lengthening in their day cycles in their internal clock during teenage years. Okay. So, and then the other piece is time and pressure. You're really busy as a teenager, right? You've got school and rec and chores and work and whatever else you have on your friends and social lives and you're at that stage of development where your parents are letting you have a little bit more freedom, and that comes with its own stress and anxiety. And sleep pressure is also, it's related to the time you're awake, but also different impacts, like the amount of stress you're on, your nutrition, your hydration. All of these things impact your sleep. And so as you become more independent, and you might eat out more because you have your own money, right? Or you're working and you grab lunch on the go at McDonald's, or that's fine. But if it becomes a habit, that diet and nutrition actually impacts your sleep pressure and can kind of impact the way you sleep and how you fall asleep.
Okay, so when you say it impacts your sleep pressure, does that mean you don't feel tired as early, or you don't want to go to bed kind of thing? Is that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of nutrients that really support healthy sleep. I have kind of the top 4 that I always like to talk about. So there's vitamin D. And so vitamin D is, we get it from the sun. We get it from different fortified sources of food. And it's really important with the sleep cycle. So it helps regulate our sleep cycle. It also helps immune system. And so one thing with sleep is that if your sleep is poor, your immune system suffers. And so there's that link between vitamin D and sleep cycles. So, and then the other one is magnesium. Magnesium is, I call it the wonder vitamin or mineral, because it helps with muscle building, it helps with relaxation, it helps with sleep. And so if you're low in magnesium, what happens is you're not able to get into those relaxation states, and you'll have restless or interrupted sleep.
Okay.
And magnesium comes from those healthy foods, right? Those
like fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, all of that sort of stuff.
Well, this is going to lead eventually to a video about healthy eating, right? How to get that vitamin D.
And then iron. Iron is a big one. And so specifically for teen girls, there's a lot of teen girls are more prone to having iron deficiencies. I'm not saying all of them, but it's definitely something that you want to keep an eye out, because you will feel that fatigue, which sometimes will equate again to I'm having poor sleep, but you might be getting good sleep, but be deficient in iron.
That is so interesting. I never even thought to think about that for my teens that maybe are struggling with sleeps. Something I'm going to check out.
It's definitely, and if you have a family history of low iron, it's also, so it becomes really important for teens to know their parents' kind of medical history,
right?
So they can do their own research, right? Because again, they're becoming independent, and we want to empower them as much as possible to make their own choices in those sort of things.
Totally.
And so then the last one is omega-3. And omega-3 is really good for sleep, as well as for mood, anxiety, and ADHD, which we'll talk about, I think, a little bit later. It's really important to kind of make sure that you're getting enough of that. Again, fish, Meat, if you eat meat, nuts, legumes, beans, green leafy vegetables, that sort of stuff. So if we're on the go a lot with that time pressure, that really impacts our nutrition, which is going to impact our sleep.
Right.
So yeah, that's
that's really eye-opening to like realize like how our diet impacts our sleep, and then both of those impact our mental health, right?
exactly.
So it's like there's so many of these daily habits that they may seem insignificant and little, but like it sounds like they can have a huge impact.
They really can. And even things as simple as hydration.
Right.
So we often if you go to the fridge, you grab juice or you grab pop or things like that. But water is so important. And with sleep, water is important because it allows us, if we're dehydrated, it doesn't allow us to decrease our body temperature, which is what we need to go into a nice, healthy sleep. Our body temperature drops about 1 degree in the second phase of our sleep. And it's not able to do that if we're dehydrated. And so that really requires us to have water.
Right.
Like just water.
I love knowing the science behind that, because it's like, I know I should drink water. I know being hydrated is important, but when we can connect it to, okay, if I don't drink enough water, my body temperature isn't going to make the change it needs to when I'm sleeping. And then I'm not going to get the sleep I need. And then I'm not going to be able to focus and have the memory and feel, my brain is going to feel crazy.
Exactly. And so I do think that sometimes it's a habit, right? That, I wanna pop, or I go to the vending machine and I grab something. And it's just sort of being aware of how those habits impact our mental health, but also our sleep, and how that kind of is a cycle and they're interdependent.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Totally love that.
It's fascinating to me. So
Yeah, totally. It really makes you think and recognize that there is a huge impact on our mental health and our sleep and our diet. All of it just like is tied together. Like you can't really talk about one of them without talking about the other.
Yes, absolutely.
They're connected.
Yeah. They really tie in hand. And if you look at mental health, with poor sleep, you often have things like low mood, anxious thoughts, lots of worrying. If you're lacking in sleep, you're also more prone to nightmares and night terrors. So all of those things combined, the research isn't clear about whether the anxiety comes first or the sleep problems come first.
Right.
And I would say the same thing about depression, and low mood. But what we do know is that they have kind of a relationship together, right? So if you having poor sleep, you're more likely. And if you have poor mood or you're anxious mood, you're more likely to have sleep problems. So it's that relationship that we're looking at more so.
Yeah, they're definitely connected.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about like the teenage brain in development and where it's at and how that affects sleep?
So the one piece from the teenage brain is that hormone production changes quite drastically, and their reaction to hormones change. And so the one specifically related to sleep would be melatonin. So a lot of us have heard of melatonin. That's the hormone that we need to help us fall asleep. A lot of people supplement melatonin. You can get it.
Yeah, I was just thinking of asking you about that.
Yeah. So a lot of people will supplement it. And generally speaking, it can be helpful, but there's also some people that don't find it helpful at all, or that it does the reverse effect.
Oh, okay.
So where they find that they're more awake if they take it. So the research there, it's quite a controversial topic. There's very limited research, especially with teens and kids. I think primarily because sleep is just starting to emerge as an area that people are recognizing as being really important.
Right.
And then also, research just takes a long time to catch up to that, right? It's not a quick process. However, what we do know is that the teenage brain often takes longer to start producing melatonin. So while you're younger, melatonin is produced a lot earlier.
Like earlier in the day, you mean?
7 to 8 p.m. Whereas a teenager, the melatonin starts to be produced a lot later. So sometimes what happens is parents say, okay, well, you can't get out of bed in the morning, so we're going to make you go to bed earlier.
Right.
What that happens is sometimes that causes a lot of frustration and anxiety but I can't get to sleep. And they can't get to sleep because the hormone isn't right. The hormone isn't there.
Right. So they like legitimately can't get to sleep. So they've got this sleep pressure thing that's changing. So they don't feel as tired. They've got the melatonin starting later. So yeah, like that gives me a little bit of perspective for my teens. I mean, like, why can't they just go to bed?
And so it's really that push and a pull. And when I'm working with teens, I often say, okay, so let's work with getting you to fall asleep a little bit later so that we hit that hormonal, but then that hormone change where you're producing melatonin in the right time where you're trying to go to sleep, right? So you're not fighting your biological or your body's function. But then you have to take some responsibility for the morning wake up. Right. So I often will talk to parents and say, okay, well, we have to let them go to bed a little bit later because they're just not ready to sleep.
Right.
But when we do that, we have to also work, and it's a partnership between the parent and the teen often, of, okay, so then how do we get you out of bed? What are you going to do to uphold that part on a consistent basis, right? Because we don't want, like, as much as possible, I try to reduce some of that conflict between the parents saying, well, you have to get to school and you have to do this, and increase the independence for the teens as well.
Right. And I can see how that, like, just the way we live our lives, right, just creates sleep for teens to be a tricky spot because they're going to bed later naturally because of the hormone changes and their brain changes. But then we're still expecting them to get up at like 6 a.m. to get on a bus and go to school or do whatever class or whatever they need to do. And so that time that they can sleep just gets kind of squished. And if they're a kid who needs 10 hours, I mean, it just doesn't add up.
Yeah. And has gymnastics, let's say, until 8, and then work on top of that, right? It becomes difficult to juggle, right?
Yeah.
And what we do know is at the age between 9 and 12, you're really sensitive to kind of that the light's impact on melatonin production. And what I mean by that is when we're exposed to bright lights, specifically our cell phones and our iPads and things that are really like shooting lights at our eyes, what happens is it stops or hinders our production of that melatonin that happens naturally in our brain. Some research is showing that older teens tend to be a little bit less sensitive, but they still are sensitive. And so if they're using their cell phones or if you're using your cell phone or your iPad or your tablet until later on in the night, what you're doing is even delaying that melatonin production even later.
Oh, that makes it like so important to really be on top of like the technology piece, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're looking at your phone or working on your computer till 10 o'clock at night, and then you're trying to go to bed, like that melatonin is like
not happening.
Far off.
Yeah, exactly. And there are cases that people in general might benefit from supplementation. For example, certain neurodevelopmental disorders, such as autism, they tend to produce teens with autism would tend to produce less melatonin than a teen without autism. So it's always good to talk to your doctor if you're considering something like that. But in general, it's often best to try to address it by saying, okay, when should I have my when can I turn off my electronics?
Yeah.
And a lot of electronics have things like the blue screen blockers or blue light blockers, or if you want to get really technical, you can buy a screen for them.
Okay.
You can buy glasses
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah. But I think like basically what it comes down to is like making a plan, right? Of like, okay, like this is when you're probably going to feel tired and want to go to sleep, and early enough so you can get maybe 8 to 10 hours before you have to get up and go. And then, okay, so when are we turning off the screens, right? So that you can get the sleep you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And then making sure, looking at our napping too, right? So I worked with teens that they can't fall asleep till 1 or 2 in the morning.
Okay.
And parents have tried, you know, their parents are like, okay, let's try this and let's try melatonin and they've been working really hard. And then we discover that there's some napping that's happening maybe afternoon for a couple hours. Well, what happens is that sleep pressure is no longer there.
Right.
And so it's about looking at sleep you need a total amount of sleep for a 24-hour period, right? So if we're having big chunks of naps, then that contributes to that 24-hour total. And so we really want to see, okay, are they coming home and having a long 2-hour nap and then can't go to sleep? Because what that does is reduces the length of time that they're in that REM sleep, right?
Right.
Because they're not having 8 hours, they're having a 2-hour and a 6-hour.
Right.
So
generally, probably it sounds like napping as a teenager is probably not a great idea.
In most cases, yeah.
I'm sure, I'm sure there's situations, but because then it's shortening that time that you're getting like that stage 3 sleep where you're repairing your body, and then the REM sleep, which is allowing you to process emotions. And like if you're missing out on those because you're taking a nap,
exactly,
probably time to adjust the sleep schedule.
Exactly. And looking at things like when you make a plan, like looking at your school and your routine in your school and saying, can I adjust any of my classes to make it so that I can sleep in later?
Right.
Or looking at those factors. Some schools are receptive to it and some schools aren't. And
right.
But sometimes you're able to collaborate and go, okay, I have a spare usually in third period. Can I move that spare to first thing and give myself an extra hour?
Right. Yeah.
So
sounds like a great way to problem solve that. So Janice, when it comes to like kids studying, like what is that effect that their sleep can have on their ability to focus and like memorize and really be more effective with the time they're spending studying?
It often comes down to scheduling. So I think what happens often, and if I remember correctly, my high school years, it came down to, I have a test tomorrow, I'm going to cram. And, you're trying to get all this information in. What happens then is you're staying up late and you're losing those periods of sleep where memory consolidation is happening. And you're not getting the sleep the next day. So your attention, your concentration, all your anxieties, your test anxiety starts to creep up. It becomes worse the next day if you're cramming that evening. So a lot of times what I recommend is saying, okay, so these tests are coming, let's set aside 15 minutes a day or a half an hour a day to study, so you're not doing the cramming. That also helps with that memory consolidation. So you study that little piece of information, that half an hour segment, and then you move to sleep, you go to sleep, and your brain works on remembering all of that, and then the next day you move to the next piece. And you take that chunk of information and then you consolidate that into your memory. It's hard to do. It's easier said than done. I'm going to be honest. I think it's something that a lot of adults struggle with.
Totally.
Not for,
but I think what we know about even learning in general, with even sleep aside, like our brains are going to learn the information better if we're doing it repeatedly over time than just kind of squish it all in at the end, right? Exactly. So many reasons to study like that instead of cramming late at night.
Exactly. And then also just you're kind of fighting your biological clock, right? So your brain isn't going to be working as well at that point anyways, right? Because your brain is releasing hormones to signal sleep time. And
Right, because you're like tired and your brain's like, we got to take care of you. You haven't had REM sleep. You haven't had stage 3. We got to repair, man.
I know we've got to get going. We got to get to sleep. So
Yeah.
Even if we kind of ignore the impact in the next day, the impact of what you're actually learning in the moment is not as great as if you could schedule it throughout your week.
Okay, so many great nuggets from Janice. Hope you guys are enjoying this, learning about sleep and how we're applying it to different parts of our life. And if you have any questions, throw them down in the comments and we'll see if we can get those answered. And as always, please subscribe to my channel and share it with anyone you think would find this helpful, because I have a few more interviews lined up that will bring in some great expertise in how to help our teens. I hope you guys have an amazing day and catch us next week for the rest of the interview.